and make some music noise. Hey y'all, we're talking baseball some more. Likely are gonna a lot, probably for the next 6 months or so. I got Eric here with the KNATS crew. We're gonna go over some of what we got for takeaways from last night's joint work session, where we had a little bit more of an official presentation. It's not the actual project plan, but it's a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of what was going on. So we'll do a short intro and we'll get started. Eric, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Good talking with you again. And
Good.
Thank you for wanting to talk with me again on this issue.
I mean, I think it's a big deal. I think it's important. I think it's something that we need to take the time to really, really dig into and make sure that we're all kind of comfortable with what's going on here. So I sat through that 2+ hour meeting last night and watched it, and as you did as well. And we chatted a little bit through a messenger or whatever about like some of the takeaways from it. And so I actually, in full disclosure, I spoke to Mr. Manitoff a few weeks ago on just over the phone, trying to set up an interview date with him on the subject. And so I called him this morning and left him a voicemail, and he got back to me this afternoon. And I'm trying to set up him to come on, and some of the other people that are part of this team putting this thing together to come on and give their side of the pitch. And so, I had a little brief chat with him just about how he felt about the meeting and stuff like that as well. But I don't know. I mean, my main takeaway, and I think that you're on the same page as me on this one, it feels kind of like a foregone conclusion, and we're just hacking out details. Just watching everybody and most of the line of questioning that happened last night, save a few specific council persons, had a few legitimate, real, like, there's some issues here we need to tackle questions, which is good. I'm glad that there's some of that, but it seemed most everybody seemed fairly passive on the conversation, I guess, once it got to the Q&A. Did you read the same thing as me?
So there definitely was a few city council people that had some good questions, and that was good to see. I think part of it, though, if you go back and you watch the 2 county commission meetings on the Sports Authority Stadium, and you watch the one city council meeting on the Sports Authority Stadium, a lot of what we heard last night was the same, right? So if I was a county commissioner, the questions, and as someone who, as you know, is really not supportive of the idea of taxpayer money being used for a stadium, I don't think I personally would have had a lot of questions. I mean, it was like, during the night, Randy Boyd, congratulated Stephanie Welch and Chris Codwell and Mark Mamintoff, and said, they did a brilliant presentation. And, I mean, that's really what it was, is it was a brilliant presentation of a PR spin on this. And I think probably some of the commissioners and city councilors saw that. It was a fluff presentation. There was really no specifics in there. And, so I don't even know if I really would have had a lot of questions if I was on the county or city at that point, because no specifics were really mentioned.
I think one of the big resolutions there from Ms. Parker that I would assume was probably happening anyway, but some subdivided work sessions are needed where we get to specific subsets of issues, the financing being one of the big ones. But again, it still speaks of it happening. Not it speaks to me that this is it's how exactly this is happening, but it's not that it is or isn't happening. To me, the takeaway is even those who are, even Miss Parker and the other councilman, who I apologize, his name has escaped me at this time, who are asking some of the more, in I think our shared opinion, poignant questions on what are some of these things. They didn't seem to be like make or break kind of questions. It's are these things you're considering, and how do we make these to where we like it? Not this has to be there or we're not doing it kind of questions. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, but I think some of the people, because both of the mayors want to see things move forward, maybe some of the other commissioners and councilors feel like, well, we got to at least let this get fleshed out, before we get into the nitty gritty.
Right.
To actually have details. I mean, if you watch those previous county commission meetings and that city council meeting, the only thing I saw that was new at last night's meeting was, the talk of a pilot. So they can't use property taxes, but, if we pass some local legislation, we can set up a pilot, which, I mean, it's from a lay person, that's really just semantics at that point. You essentially are using revenues that would otherwise have property taxes for the payment of the bonds. I think Mr. Boyd admitting that regardless of if the stadium is approved or not, he's going to develop the area. So, one of the things that are being spun is that we need this stadium to get $142 million in private development. But that is not what Randy Boyd said. Randy Boyd said that he's going to develop the property. The guy has spent millions of dollars
right. I mean, to push back a little bit on to keep it in context of the quote is that he said something along the lines of he will figure out what he's going to do with it without the baseball stadium. To me, which I agree with you, to me it lends to there. He has some plan. He may not have a backup plan in place, but he knows there is other things he can do down there, which does lead to the idea that it's going to develop either way. And I agree with you on that. But he seemed to be specifically non-committal. Like, I don't know, like to me, it the way he worded it made it almost like, he might just sell it off or get rid of it or something like that. Not that he was going to do something with it if it's not there. He will find out. He will figure out what he feels is the best plan to do with it if the stadium doesn't go down there, which to me is a little bit more broad than he's going to develop it anyway. He might sell it off and somebody else may develop it, whatever. But that's how I took it, at least, is that it was a little broader than he's going to do something anyway. Well, yes, he's going to do something, but that something being develop it or, sell that land off or do something different with it.
Well, his public commitment that he would tear down the buildings would make that land, that much closer to any type of development.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I mean, he was praised for being a very good business person last night. And I don't see a business person spending millions of dollars. I mean, after he tears down those buildings, I mean, we're talking about a substantial amount of money. I don't see him not doing something with that investment, even if he does sell it off.
Right. That still lends to, right. It's selling it off to somebody who is going to develop it, whether it's him personally or his group or not. But, and I agree with you on that for sure. I just want to kind of be fair in phrasing to make it, again, I'm trying to come at this. My gut reaction is I'm with you. I don't think it makes sense for the taxpayers to pay for it, but I'm trying to come at this as holistically as possible to let the different parts and pieces kind of, I don't know, congeal into what is going to happen. And I'm just trying to be very forthright in making sure that I am understanding what's happening, because if I can understand it, then we can share that. And because one of the things I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see this turn into a Board of Health argument where the public at large who is voicing their opinions aren't on point to what the actual topic is to discuss. That's what frustrates me most about the Board of Health argument. I don't think for the most part people are having the conversation about what the actual issue at play is that the parties are fighting over. They're just fighting over it and really weird. To me, the Board of Health is two separate arguments by the two sides that not necessarily have anything to do with each other. And what I want to see out of this baseball conversation, at least, is have it on point. Like we're talking about, is it good for us to spend the tax money this way? Is it good for us to not get a return on this investment over X number of years? Is it good for us to do, like, I want the points to be precise, where I think that's one of the things that's most frustrating about watching the Board of Health mess is the points aren't precise. They're very anecdotal. They're very personal, but they're not they're not really in the realm of what the conversation should be about. And so that's my goal out of this. So again, I took it as very soft. And I agree with you. It didn't get us any closer to some of the details, but I guess that was kind of stated at the get-go. We have the slides up in the background. It's the project overview, just some of the stuff. And I mean, how many times did we hear him say, we got a third-party study that we're going to do for this and a third-party study we're going to do for that. So we don't know the answers to these things yet. And it's like, okay, well, again, transparencies happen, so I'm not mad at it, but let's, if we're going to have conversations, we need to be able to answer questions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. But to take it a step further too, when you're talking about public discussion, they're not even having a public discussion about if the public wants their taxpayer dollars being used for a stadium. If the public thinks this is the right priorities for spending taxpayer dollars, that part of the public discussion has already been overlooked. I mean, it would have been nice to see from the get-go them have a true public discussion. And, and I'm not saying like just let people speak for 3 minutes, like actually let people in the public ask questions, you know, and then have a discussion where someone from the government would respond. And then from there, additional questions could be asked.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Because again, I don't think that. I don't think anybody's. It's very much just like it's just this assumed thing, like that this is a thing, and there's no. But I don't know how to ask the question of is this something you want or not, because I think the automatic response of anybody who's paying attention is going to be a litany of questions. And how do you have? I mean, I guess that's what we tried to do with the first time you guys were here, and everybody else I've talked to about it since it kind of came up as a thing, is that we're all talking in abstract because we don't have a concrete plan, and the gut reaction is, well, what are they going to do with this? How are they going to do that? So at least on my end of it, a body of questions has risen from conversation about it. Now the action of whether those questions are going to get asked and answered is kind of where I'm at it, because I think a lot of the stuff, like I guess like you said, like there wasn't a lot to me other than the picture down here that gave us a much more specific. That's the much more specific location and what's what on, the blue area being the actual baseball complex, and then the everything else is Randy property that he's promising to do stuff with. But watching, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, but just we're at this. I don't know. Maybe it's me, and I don't understand the process as well, because like I feel like there are a group of people, you and myself included, that have a mountain of questions. And until we get a real proposal, it's going to be hard to answer those questions. And I think last night, at least to me, felt like we were going to get more answers than we did. And maybe that was a misinterpretation on my end.
Sure. But there are that are not abstract. I mean, talking about a public-private partnership where the taxpayer is on the hook for all the payments, all the risk and liability, but Randy Boyd is the one that gets all the profit. I think that's a conversation and discussion you can have with the community now. Like you don't need actual numbers to talk about that, like as a philosophical discussion.
Right.
And then another thing too is, we have people that want to prioritize infrastructure and community safety and education and public health, regardless of whether you're for this or against it. By spending $65 million on a project, you have now deprioritized those other categories that I mentioned, because there is only a limited number. The pie is limited.
Right.
Right. And so at the end of the day, that's deprioritized. And maybe people feel like, hey, it's still worth it because the economic development outweighs the cost and it will actually benefit those other categories. Well, then, I mean, let's have that discussion. But that's been complete. At this point, that train has left the station. So there's really not much more to talk about that. I think another thing, though, that we should be talking about is the 20-year versus 30-year bond. Last night, they talked about a 30-year bond.
Right.
Randy Boyd admitted that he gets a 10-year contract from Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball just contracted the minor leagues by 25% in the last year. There's no guarantee where Major League Baseball is going to be 10, 20, 30 years from now, but we are taking a risk on a business that only gets a 10-year contract. We're doing a 30-year bond.
Right. And so, it's, he promised that he would keep and pay for the team to no end. He made that reference to the Hunt family in Kansas City or whatever, that he's not getting rid of the team no matter what, unless it's taken away from him, essentially, is kind of what it broke down to. But yeah, like that, he said he was re-upping that right now. So what, 23 is the target open date?
Well, I mean, with the 10-year contract with the Major League Baseball he's doing now, so that would only
right. It'd be 7 or 8 years once it's built, right?
Yeah.
So we're not even going to get it. We don't have a guarantee from Major League Baseball that the team will exist even a third of the way through the bond is yes. What's in question here.
Great. Yeah, good point.
And that's that, and I heard that too, and I thought that was a great question. And then I was the city council person whose name escaped me earlier. I thought that was a really good question. It's like we're putting a 20 or 30-year bond on there, but 30 being the one that was more talked about. But we're only if as of the next couple months whenever he finishes contract with Major League Baseball. If that goes through, it's 10 years from date. So something weird happens, and I would assume that baseball can't contract sooner than that, or if they do, they have some sort of penalty that they would have to help the Boyd Sports Organization pay off stuff associated with the baseball team to finish that 10-year contract. But that still only gets us to 2031, 2032, and we've still got till 2050-ish to pay this bond off. And I don't know. Like I said, I'm fascinated to watch it happen, and I think it was good to get some stuff out in the air, and give a starting point for some stuff. I'm looking forward to watching some of these other like subversion meetings where we get a little bit more specific on this, that, and the other. Because one thing I'm still confused on is in this financing part of the conversation. If I heard Mr. Manitov correctly, that the whole point of the special tax district is that all the sales tax come back to pay the loan off, except for 1.5% that goes into the school system. And I was curious. I didn't quite like it. It kind of flew by pretty quick, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him about that. That's something I was actually holding to talk to him on air about when I spoke to him earlier, because that's one of those things in a broader picture that's outside of baseball that I'm still trying to figure out how schools are financed and all that kind of craziness. So I'm working on that as trying to understand how the school board interacts with the county and the state and all that kind of crap. But if I heard it correctly, is basically he said that 1.5% of sales tax goes into the state school budget regardless, and that won't come back. So we're only going to get the 7 3/4 or whatever of sales tax, but we still get more sales tax back than normally for this special tax district thing. And so that's a little detail that I'm curious to know more about. That's on my list of things to try to learn more about, because if it does, theoretically, it would benefit the school system, but no other structures countywide, if I heard that correctly, financially. But again, I need to follow up on that. I didn't know if you knew any more or you heard the same thing.
I mean, the only thing I know is for the for the city sales tax, based on previous discussions, and I had a discussion with Chris Codwell about something else, and it was 72% of the city's sales tax goes to Knox County schools. So maybe that's related to what you're referencing. The one thing about the legislation, so there's the state sales tax portion that would be redirected to paying off the bonds. One of the ways that's being spun is like, okay, well, that's state money that we're now bringing back to the community, but that's not the case, right? The money is actually going to pay the bondholders off. So whether you're talking about hedge funds, whether you're talking about public pensions, whether you're just talking about, Wall Street, I mean, that's who the money's going to at the end of the day. And what those state education dollars are going to is, education, healthcare, and infrastructure. And that money does come back to Knox County already when the state spends in those categories, plus others, but they're smaller percentages.
Right. But I guess I follow what you're saying. But the point, I guess, in the pitch to me is that we're getting all of that back, and that's all coming directly back to county instead of only coming back as a portion where it gets split out for the rest of the state. That's the argument, at least. And again, I think they're vague on it intentionally because of what it actually means. But I mean, I follow both sides of what we're saying right now, but I think it's a poorly worded, or it's vaguely worded with intent to kind of be like, well, we get all 7% back for this. And it's like, well, yeah, but we usually get 6% back through all the different services the state provides.
Sure.
And so it's a little bit I get it, but yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things in regards to the financial numbers, so during the meeting, Randy Boyd was very clear that without the public paying for the stadium, and I think he went as far as saying for 100% of the cost, it doesn't make financial sense for him to pay for the stadium. So with him being a private business owner and him being, as everybody pointed out at the meeting, one of the top business people in Tennessee, if it doesn't make financial sense for him, how does it make financial sense for the public to do this when we have employees of city and county government that don't have the business experience that, say, someone like Randy Boyd has?
Right. But I think that's to say that's why I pulled this slide up in with intention. It's not that it doesn't make business sense. It does it. How do I word this? It could make business sense, but it makes more business sense in the this is a norm. The this slide that I have up now, the majority of stadiums in the United States are publicly owned and or publicly supported. Like that premise is
Well, I mean, just because something's a norm doesn't mean
right.
it
I agree
makes
with you, but
yeah.
I think that's why it doesn't make financial sense, because why would I when I could go somewhere and get it paid for? I think is the argument there. And again, vaguely, intentionally vague. I mean, how you can't say you can't afford it if you've got 140 million that you're going to spend, and this thing costs 65. Well, you got 140 million to spend. Spend the 65 here. Spend the other 75 million on your other stuff, and then over time you can finish the 140 around it. It doesn't.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, to say that he can't afford it when he's promising to spend almost twice as much or more than twice as much around it, that those two terms don't line up.
Well, and I don't know if he didn't say the words "I cannot afford it." He was talking about financial sense was his actual words. So I think that just goes more to the fact that look, he's a business person. He's looking for the best return on his investment. A stadium is not the best return on his investment. The private apartments that he wants to do, the retail shops that he wants to do, that's where the big money's at. And so that's why he's investing in that. Now, if the taxpayers of Knox County and the city of Knoxville can be used to pay for the bad investment, which is the stadium, more power to him. I mean, that's his line of thinking.
Right. That's what. I agree with you on that, because I mean, again, it is an option, and it's an option, and it's a normal option to owners of teams similar to this. So it makes the best financial sense to use the option that is out there, and he wants to do it in his home or whatever, and that's great. But that, I think, is the detail of that statement that is kind of vague. Is that it makes financial sense because this is the norm. And again, that's the question that is one of the big questions. Is just because it's the norm doesn't mean it's needs to happen that way. And whether we as a county and city buck that norm and say no thank you, and let it fall where it falls, or we continue the norm, that is a whole conversation in and of itself outside of this particular one. But it is part of this one as well. And I don't know, there was it's an easy it's an easy line of logic to follow that's really hard to prove. The idea, one of the things he talked about was they kept referencing this Fort Wayne, Indiana complex, and some of the things they liked and some of the things they don't like about it. The idea of the parking spaces being available. There is enough parking downtown, which in my recollection was always one of the big problems with doing anything downtown. That was half the problem with when they were trying to do the World's Fair project, was hotels and parkings used to always be a thing for downtown, and now all of a sudden it's not on this project, which I find interesting. But they said they did the survey on it. The parking spaces are there. But it's an easy line of logic to follow that it's good for everybody and all the businesses down there if you're parking a couple blocks away and you're stopping at Barley's on the way in or the way out of the game, or you're stopping in through the other stuff that's in the old city or the new stuff that comes up as the process. I got a couple friends that own and operate some of the places down on Gay Street, and I could see them being excited about this as an option because people are going to park in those downtown parking garages and walk over there. And so, I don't know. I think that what's weird to me about this is the deeper I get into it, the less opinion I can hammer down. And I don't know if that's just me being indecisive or if that's me trying to really see kind of both sides of the situation. One of the things that I think we as a county should demand if this happens is this guaranteed bookings. I think we want more bookings. He said maybe 10 a year when they were talking about it. But I don't know. That goes to the next level of conversation. I don't know if we want to go that far down the game.
Well, I mean, one of the points you brought up was the parking garages. So one thing I'm hoping they discuss with the public, and I don't know why they've been hesitant to so far, is they've talked about a $65 million stadium, right? Now Nashville spent 21 million in infrastructure around their minor league baseball stadium. We haven't even begun to talk about the infrastructure around this stadium. And I think part of the reason is like if Nashville spent 21, let's say we spend 15, now we're no longer talking about a $65 million stadium. We're talking about an $80 million stadium.
Right.
Regardless of what the infrastructure is, it raises the number, right? So the higher the number is for taxpayers, the more people that are starting to be like, whoa. Now, you know, I don't know how often you would go down to Old City on a Friday or Saturday night, but pre-COVID, there were some nights where the parking was pretty packed in that area.
Right.
And when you had a stadium, which even last night, I think they were talking about, you're probably looking at what, 2,000 cars. I think they estimated.
Right. It's 5,000 seats, and you want a parking space for every 3 seats, I think is what he said. So it's like 1,700.
So unless the number changed, I think it was over 7,000 seats. And then, like you said, it's 3-1 on the parking. So, you know, let's just go with the 2,000 number.
Sure.
I mean, there is no way that area is going to be able to handle that on a Friday or Saturday night if there's a ball game. So what I think would eventually happen is after the stadium's built, after they get what they want, then it would be like, oh, we have a parking problem, so we need a parking garage. Well, why don't they talk about that now? Because, again, it raises the price tag of the stadium. You know, there should at least be a discussion on, you know, doing an actual impact to see if that's going to be something that's needed.
Right. Let's here in the middle of the summer, once COVID's cleared out and we're back to normal-ish, just take a random Friday night and send the city crews out to block off 1,700, 2,000 parking spaces in and around downtown Old City and see how it goes. Just as a very anecdotal study, but it follows the logic because part of it you could argue, well, if it's baseball, it's late afternoon, evening game, they clear out before some of the nightlife shows up. But what happens when there's a concert there? And we're talking more than 7,000 seats because we have seats on the in the outfield or however they configure the stadium to do a concert, and it's a 10,000 or a 12,000 seat venue for certain events. And then that 3-1 on 12,000 seats is now 4,000 parking spaces, which we'd have to get that take up everything at the Civic, that takes up everything, downtown Market Square. Old City, that then we're taking over even more. So that's a good point that I hadn't necessarily considered, because that's one of the things that was, I mean, as you were starting that little bit of conversation there, is I'm thinking is like, well, what infrastructure could potentially be needed, and parking being one of them. Because access, I don't know how much access would change as far as the roadways that are down there currently and stuff like that. I have no idea what this would do to utilities and utility service availability.
So if you go back to that map, the stadium is going to be over one of the roads. Actually, 2 of the roads, I think, just to answer that question.
Where'd it go?
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, there's can't tell the name of the streets on here, but
so one of the roads, are just, the stadium's going to be over it. Yeah,
because I'm trying to think. I haven't been down there in a hot minute, because right here, this Patton Street, that's where that Weigel's is that goes down back in there. I don't know. At least on the map here, it doesn't look like access would change much. I mean, it shouldn't change anything for getting down in there where they're covering roads up. But
one of the important things about that, though, is I just think if you're going to be honest about the true cost of the stadium,
right?
Consider everything, because like Nashville, they said their stadium was going to cost $60 million, and it ended up costing $91 million because the stadium itself went over budget $10 million, and then they did $21 million in infrastructure. So we should have an honest conversation. If you want a public decision, and if infrastructure plus the stadium ends up being $80 million, well, then the public has a right to know.
Right.
And the same thing with construction costs going overboard in Nashville, and that was years ago when they built their stadium. I want to say 8 years ago, but I could be somewhat off. Maybe it was actually like 6 years ago on that. Knox News just reported how construction costs locally have skyrocketed, for new construction. So, I'd be interested to know if Randy Boyd's 65 million number is even accurate
Right,
anymore,
right. That's
considering, you
right,
know,
right. Materials cost right now is through the roof. And then a couple weeks ago, I had Mr. J in, and we were talking about stuff, and he was telling me that the Planning Commission is estimating an additional 200,000 residents over the next 10 years. And which on this line of conversation says to me, materials costs aren't coming down locally. They're going to stay up and they're going to stay high because we're in a building frenzy. Like we can't build enough housing right now to handle the people that are trying to move into Knoxville. I've got sadly, I have a friend of mine who's lived here his whole life, and he just had a baby, and they are desperately trying to find a house, and it's just not like it's either way out of budget or way too much work to get it livable with a baby because of the way the housing market is moving right now. And to underscore your point, I don't see the cost of materials coming down anytime soon. And that's a good question because I don't know when they produced this I don't know where the $65 million number comes from anyway. That's part of it to me. I don't know exactly who came up with that number, where it came from, and when it was produced. Because if it was produced a year ago, it's not accurate with building costs anymore. So it's good that's interesting. So I mean, I don't know. Like I don't understand how much buildings cost to build anyway, obviously. And I'd be curious if I mean, assume we'll have to get a look at that at some point once it gets closer to it. But it's also, this is one of the things to me in my more questioning government actions anyway, is if we're the contractor and we're hiring all these people, it's going to be more expensive than if you and I as an individual were, as opposed to the city or county doing it. That's my general take. I don't have any evidence to said statement, but when the city of Knoxville contracts somebody to do a job, it always tends to come out a little bit more expensive than if I did it as an individual. And how much that inflates that $65 million number even further. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else. Anything else pop out from last night that you want to do?
not much. I mean, that was, I think, just them bringing up the pilot, that was something that was new to the public. I appreciated Parker, Councilmember Parker. She brought up the questions about jobs. Boyd said his current stadium employs 80 people. Considering, I would imagine that's mostly part-time, right? I mean, if they're not there, 250 days out of the year, you're probably looking at part-time employment. But he has a study that says 3,000 jobs. So that number didn't mesh well. And when Parker asked him that number, he pretty much dodged it and was like, I'll send you the study.
Right.
Look, he's a very smart guy. I think he knows the jobs number. That 3,000 sounds highly inflated.
Well, it's probably
that's going to be their main point is jobs and economic development.
Right. I'm assuming his estimate 3,000 number is including the new businesses that go in and the people that go along with that, even though we don't even know what these new businesses are, because if you put a restaurant in or a bar or something like that, that's a dozen employees. Or if if it's a retail shop, that's only one employee, depending on the style of retail or whatever it is. And the part-time being a big question of too. And, because and again, that 80 is probably actual baseball operations staff. That's not even stadium employees. That's actually, the trainers and the grounds crew and stuff like that. That is probably full-time. That 80 number is probably the full-time just for the Smokies, not counting any of the other staff that they bring in for game days. I would assume that like their concession staff and stuff like that is part-time, like you're saying. But yeah, because the idea of it being open to the public is weird to me. Like it should be if we pay for it. But like how that's going to mesh with operations is like we can go down there. I can go down there and have lunch at somewhere in the old city and go walk over and hang out on the baseball field in the afternoon, and nobody's going to say anything about it. That seems weird to me. It's a nice feature, I guess, but it just seems weird to me that, I know it's minor league baseball. It's not, your Cubs, for example. I noticed you wore that shirt. I'm assuming on purpose. I don't see the grounds crew being real keen on going out and picking up cigarette butts and other litter off the field right before a game because the public's in there messing around.
Yeah.
That's cool if they're going to do it, but I just don't know how you do that functionally over time without it becoming a nuisance to the operations of baseball.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the buzzwords. I mean, that's why it was kind of a PR stunt last night. Like the page you even have up right now on the screen. I mean, saying words like civic furniture, that is a completely made up phrase. I mean, come on.
It doesn't even make sense if you think about it.
It doesn't make sense. It's a complete, that's when, see, and it's unfortunate that Glenn Jacobs used that word too, but that is when you're trying too hard at that point. You know what I mean? Like, you are trying too hard to sell this to the public when you say words like civic furniture.
Right. I mean, like, anchor tenant makes sense to me. Like, I understand that phrase. That makes sense. An anchor tenant, something that, what used to be a normal mall complex, you'd have a Sears and a JCPenney. Those are your anchor tenants. Then it fills in the middle because you get the people overlapping. But the civic furniture, it's just a weird word. Like, it's anchor tenant would have been fine. It would have been more accurate for the premise of what we're trying to do. You have a big something that draws a lot of people down there a lot of the time, and it's going to help all the businesses around it. That's an anchor tenant. I don't know where civic furniture comes from, because I don't know. It's just a weird word.
Very weird.
I doubt. I mean, and again, I don't know. This is one of the things I struggle with as time progresses. It's like, other than like, I don't know. I have 2 retail shops that I own and operate myself, with a business partner of mine who's also a guest or a host on the show with me sometimes. I don't know that I'd want to put one of my places down there. Like, if the only thing I would want to put down there as a business for the small business growth part of it, it'd be a bar or a restaurant. And how many bars and restaurants can be there and function without baseball? I grew up, my first restaurant job was on the Strip. Charlie's on the Strip back in the day, where you lived and died by football season. And to me, if you're going to develop all this stuff up, they're going to, how can we functionally have a bunch of bars and restaurants down there that don't live and die by baseball games? Which the further tragedy of if we lost the team on top of everything else going on. But to have that, to put a new version of that format, who else would want to go down there what type of business would want to install in there? And I guess it also depends on how much residential they put in there too. If there is a bunch of residential, other stuff will work. But that's one of the parts of the surrounding promise, which again, I guarantee to build all this stuff up around it. Well, that's a great word, but I don't know, what does that actually mean? A guarantee to actually do it. But how much residential goes in down there is going to make a difference. And then, there's the conversation of property value and stuff, which is another weird one. It's like, the point is to raise property value, but we have what are 2 of our largest fixed income or fixed rent housing projects right near there. So that property value is not raising. That's not raising the tax base, unless we're going to push them out, which that's not going to go over well either. And so, like, how much can we really raise the tax base out of this, even when we get over the bond period, when it's actually making its own money? And that's one of the things that I'm confused on too.
Yeah. So, and part of that is spin on their part. So to talk about the taxes again, I think enough was said at that meeting that Old City's developing one way or another, with or without a stadium, right? So let's say there's a scenario where there's no stadium, right? You're going to have development in there, and we are going to get sales tax revenue, and we are going to get property tax revenue. But now we have this scenario that they discussed last night, that there is a stadium. Okay, when Boyd donates the land to the Sports Authority, under state law, sports authorities are 100% exempt from property taxes. So, someone can make the argument, well, he's donating the land. Yeah, but it's to benefit him. It's not for a school. It's not for a park. It's only to benefit him. I mean, it
is for a walking track or something, apparently, as a park, but that was a joke. I'm sorry.
Yeah. When people can walk during the day. So that's a hidden subsidy, but also, with them doing the pilot now, and then doing the state legislation to do the special sales tax district, now all that revenue is lost. And so I'm under the image that Old City's going to develop regardless. So it's not all or nothing. We do actually lose out on these property taxes and sales taxes, going in the direction of a stadium. We otherwise would have it if we go in this direction.
Right. Okay. So this is a question that I've specifically set aside that I'm going to ask Mr. Manitov when I get him. But with the bond structure and stuff like that, if let's put the positive silver lining. Let's pretend everything goes perfectly. All right, we get that in there. Every game sold out. Every unit of all these different complexes he builds around it gets open, gets up and running, and all the tenants are full, all the housing's full, and all that different stuff. Is there a cap in this special tax district thing where it caps off or pays off early, or is it, we just, you know what I'm saying? Like if I wouldn't even know where the numbers would be, but like if it's the 30-year bond that we're doing and it comes out to whatever the simple math, we'll say it's $1 million a month. That's bad math. I know it is, but that's not the point. And the tax revenue coming out of that exceeds that what would be the bond payment. Does that then fall back into normal taxes, or we prepay the bond so that if everything went great for 10 years, it's paid off early? Is that something that, does it even make sense what I'm trying to ask right now?
Yeah, it does make sense, but that's definitely a question for Mr. Mammoth.
Because again, like if let's pretend to be positive about it, and we're going to do this, and we're going to put it in, and it's going to kick ass and take names, and everything's going to get full, and not only it, but then the old city is going to pick up from it too, and all the different stuff that we are selling this idea on. If everything goes perfectly, is there potential to pay it off early and we get that tax revenue back sooner? Or if it exceeds a payment value, that extra goes back into regular taxes, and then the regular coffers, and then get spent elsewhere on other things around the county. Or city for that matter. That's a question that I have that I don't know. It's just it's the most positive real question I can think of is assuming everything goes perfect, which it won't. But that is a potential positive in premise, depending on how that actually would work. Because again, I just think my feelings on that thing is that there wasn't. Civic pride. I don't get that one. Like some of the sales pitch stuff just didn't land right for me. I don't like the idea that we get. I agree with Manitov's point of, if we're gonna do it, let the Smokies organization do their part of it. To try to be intermittently active in it, I don't like that idea. It's either us or them, is what I think it should be. I don't like the idea of he only gets it for baseball and then we have to manage it otherwise. Because it gets into, regardless, I don't know how that changes financing, even though Manitov said it would change some of the way the financing works. But us trying to manage doing concerts and promoters and other events there, it's either we manage it or the Smokies manage it. I don't like the idea of the mixed management idea.
Yeah, you know what? Let's bring up another philosophical point here. Now you are just competing with other event venues in the area, wedding venues in the area. How is that right? These are business owners that have poured their life savings into businesses, and now we have a publicly owned, highly subsidized facility that's now competing against them. And I have a serious problem with that. And there's some people that have brought up the point that him being UT president, there's a conflict there because
right.
UT has facilities that are used for sports, but also used for concerts. And now if these concerts end up going to, his thing, or let's take the Coliseum, it's like, how does that benefit the city that instead of a concert at the Coliseum, it now happens at the stadium?
Well, maybe you know the answer to that, because I was under the impression that the Coliseum side of the Civic, at least, is in the same format that they're discussing for the baseball stadium, is that the Ice Bears are the primary tenant and they do everything. Is that accurate?
I have not looked into the lease for the Ice Bears.
My understanding of it, I did some dealings with the Ice Bears once upon a time. And my understanding of it is that anything that goes into the Coliseum, I don't know if the auditorium, I don't know if they run together like that, but I know my understanding of the Coliseum side of it was, if a concert came through, if the circus came through back when you were allowed to do circuses, Disney on Ice or whatever wanted to come through, whatever, that all went through the Ice Bears, and the Ice Bears just paid rent. And so if there was an event there, like a concert came in through there, the promoter dealt with the Ice Bears and they did all their stuff, and the Ice Bears just kept paying rent and sales tax. That's all that my understanding of it was that's how that worked. That's how that works in the Civic currently. So that's already not to. I didn't mean to bring that up to push back against the premise, but that's already happening in the Civic. If I understand the way the Civic is working correctly, is that I mean, I would assume the Tennessee Theater is the same thing. We own the state or the city owns the theater, right?
The Tennessee Theater?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
I don't know. I don't know. It just kind of popped in my head while I was saying that other bit. I don't know. Not that because it's normal makes it okay, but I believe that the Civic is already operating under the same premise. So there are other venues that are getting the same subsidy potentially as the Smokies would in the sense that we're talking about. But again, I don't know that 100% because I haven't dug through their financing and setup deeply either. I'm trying to see what else is on here that popped out to me. Blah, blah, blah. Indiana. What's happening in Tennessee? Yeah, this was one I was looking at too, and I haven't reviewed it prior to getting on here. But yeah, the rent from the team, that's a big number too. That's a huge number. That's a hugely important number once it's whatever I can't remember what term they were using last night. Reasonable rent or whatever it is. That's an important number to me with the real plan when it comes out.
Yeah. So what I heard from talking with two public officials in a meeting, they said that their plan is to have Randy Boyd pay $1 million lease on the property. If you go to the Sports Authority website in Nashville, it says their minor league baseball team pays them $700,000 lease. So, if the city and county can negotiate more in rent or lease than the city of Nashville, more power to them. But I'm skeptical that we will be able to get more rent than Nashville. Right,
because I mean, I think again, bad math. I don't know what the math would be. Let's what would be? I should pull out the mortgage calculator. I don't know what would a mortgage payment be on a $65 million house.
No, I would need a calculator.
I think I did it once, and I want to say it came out to somewhere in the $30,000 a month range. I want to say, and that was like a simple 0% interest that was just paying off with no interest, $35,000 a month or whatever. Which I don't know if that's a reasonable number or not. I don't know what that I don't have a reference to what that would mean. That would be 30 a month. No, that's not right. Fuck. Anyway, it'd be $2 million a year ish. I guess would be the easy way to do it. $2 million a year divided by 12.
Okay, so what they've said in the past, if you're looking for the annual payment, what they have said at public meetings is going to be about $4 million. So if they get $1 million from the team, you're looking at 25% of the annual payment from the lease. Does that kind of get you? Maybe.
If they're paying a total of $1 million a year in rent, it'd be $83,000 plus a month in rent. Because I don't know. I don't. My business isn't big enough. I don't think in yearly terms. I think in monthly terms. That's pay my rent, pay my KUB bill, pay all that stuff in monthly terms. Or in a 30-day month. It's $3,000 a day would be his average rent on that. And I don't know if that number makes sense. That's what I have no idea if that number would make sense functionally.
So if you look at the Nashville number, what it ends up being is $10,000 a home game.
Okay, that makes sense.
Their $700,000 lease.
Right.
Not saying that's how they calculated it, but that just happens to be the case coincidentally.
Yeah, because again, that to me is the biggest number, and I that's the 22 to 30%. I just feel like that should be a bigger percentage of the debt service to me, because that would be a normal person's. Try to put it in more normal human budget. Your rent is the number one. That's the number one cost in most businesses. Well, no, it's not if you're doing it right, but I just totally blanked out on what I was trying to say there. It's too early in the day and I don't have a cocktail. That's usually what gets me through these shows. but I don't know that to me, like, I think we talked about it when you guys were here last time. To me, if to me the rent should be, the rent needs to be more than a quarter of the total to me, because that puts more interest in making it work and making more things happen. And maybe that's not in the best interest of the public. I don't know, because again, if I think the major sell point to me is the other stuff, because I don't particularly care about baseball, but other activities that can go on down there that'd be cool. Because I think one of the things that we lost, and I don't know why we lost it, when they quit doing concerts down in World's Fair Park. Like, we have no outdoor venue anymore of any substantial size for concerts to come through. The only thing, 4th of July down there, that's the only thing I know that they still do at World's Fair. And to have a good outdoor venue would be nice to have. So I would hope that that's high on the priority list of a lot of those happening. Summer festivals and stuff coming through, but I don't know. Again, I don't know. Maybe I'm defeated in it, and it feels to me like this is happening, and we're just hammering out the details. That's really all that meeting felt like last night to me.
We'll see. Look, this is the people's government. It's their taxes. They have a right to say. The city council has an election for the majority of the city council seats this year. And I think people, if they don't agree with what's happening, should engage in the process and get involved.
I agree. I agree.
And so, and I think Lauren Ryder, councilwoman, she said this is not a done deal, and we'll see what happens. This is a huge financial risk. It is some of the things that they're talking about, I think, on the 30-year bond is reckless. I think even the speed that they're moving forward with this is reckless. And I would be surprised some of the county commissioners who claim to be fiscal conservatives would, do the final passage of this without really getting into the financial numbers. And look, last night, there's a lot of if coming off of this plan, right? It's right. If the state legislature passes this, it's if we pass this pilot, it's if we get X number of dollars in a lease. So there's a lot of ifs so far,
right?
Unless they know something that they're not disclosing to the public. I'm going to take them at their word at that meeting, that they truly believe that those estimates are their best guess.
Right. And I don't know, because the one that really struck me, that kind of pushed me over the edge of the eventuality of this conversation, is that other developer that's breaking ground over there next to Barley's. I think I sent you that story from WVLT.
Okay, yeah.
Where, literally, it was paraphrased, but it was more or less a quote out of this developer's mouth, that it's like, yeah, when the baseball stadium gets here, it's going to be even better. And it's
but that's speculation. Right. I think one of the developers over there said that, hey, look, I bought this property expecting the stadium. Well, that's speculation. That's not, people do that all the time. That doesn't mean that their speculation in the investment happens.
Right. And I think on that same premise, when Boyd was asked specifically if there's a potential for privately funding this, and he basically said no, I think there's a falsity in there too. I think you could get a good number of people that would be willing to pitch in on this on some level, but you'd have to make it worth their while. But it's a speculative risk that something happens. But I think you could get a stadium investment group put together, and you could have a lot of like $500 sales prices or sales purchase, and have a bunch of people pitch in on it, and some people buying 10 and 15 grand worth of it. As long as I think I think that was a false statement that there's no private option on the table. I think it's just that even with all the paperwork and red tape that is involved in this version of it, the private option is just more work, and that it would be easier to do it this way, or it's more profitable because they won't have to pay a private investor. They'd have to pay private investors more than the public investment. Because I'd be down with it. I'd buy a couple $100. I'd buy a couple shares just for fun, to say I'm a part owner of the baseball stadium. I think you could get. I think the money's there. I just think it's not. It's not as profitable, and I think that's why we're going down this road.
Yeah.
But right here, this last slide is the one that's the timeline, and I mean that does seem pretty quick. I mean, we're looking at the way it reads to me is they want to break ground in 6 months. You know.
I mean, but here's the thing about the timeline that I'm a little skeptical on is so December they passed the sports authority and it was like, look, we have to pass this now, right? I mean, like there was a couple city councilors that are like, well, let's have a workshop and then we'll do the sports authority. Let's have, a workshop on the sports authority. It's like, no, we have to move forward with this now. That happened like mid-December. And then the next meeting they have on it is early February. So
Right.
why was it rushed in December on the sports authority? Like nothing has happened since then. We haven't even appointed the members, which are not even going to happen until March.
Right.
So I guess the question is, why was it rushed when, why did you say like we have to pass this now so that we can appoint people 3 months from now?
Yeah, that is. It does seem like if you're going to push it that hard, then it should have been in place quickly after.
And then, what do they mean by meetings, right? So you had meetings in mid-December, and then the next one you have, which had no public forum, was early February. So what are we talking now? Are we talking like we're going to have a meeting in April and the public gets to speak for 3 minutes about it? Like that's not a public discussion. Like a public discussion is like, hey, I have these questions. And then Chris Codwell, Stephanie Welch, and Mark Mamontoff responds to that community member that has that concern. And then that community member can say like, okay, well, based on what you just said, what would happen in this instance? And then you get, you know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
an actual discussion.
Right. But I think one of the problems with that discussion when we get to have it is, at least as of right now, it's harder to talk about because we don't have the specifics. We don't have the program, like the actual plan drop down. We just have this timeline and we're still in obscure or whatever the smart word I used earlier. We're still in hypotheticals and stuff because
Okay, well, that's a great point. So, okay, like the legislative process, let's say the state and House do not pass the special taxing district component until April, right?
Right.
And the governor doesn't sign it till June, right? So we say like, okay, well, we can't have the public discussion now because the governor didn't sign this until June, so we didn't know it was going to happen, so we can't bring you those specifics.
Right.
I mean, that's not right. If and your point is well taken. If we can't have specifics until the state tackles this legislation, then I would make the case then if that's going to be what you're saying, because you want to provide specifics, then you can't even begin that. So they're saying March, April, May, June, July, a 5-month process of discussion, then that doesn't start until after that legislation is enacted into law.
Right.
But you think that's going to happen?
Right. No, I get what you're saying for sure. Because I mean, this has been the frustrating thing to me in talking about it is we don't know what we're talking about yet. And we won't know what we're talking about until X, Y, or Z happens. And I struggle to keep up with the city and county legislation and how they're doing stuff, let alone what's going on state level. And so, pending the decision from the state and the state doing certain things, slowing down when we get different details on the table, and again, he's this timeline's trying to say fall, which is August, September. That's 6-7 months away that he wants to break ground on this. That's not a lot of time to talk about it, even if we had everything today. If we had everything in front of us today where we could get people that actually know what some of the details mean, because that's one of the things too, that to me, it's like, I think it was Richie Beeler I had on the show and maybe not. And one of the commissioners I had on the show and we were talking about it. And, for me, just a regular dude, when you say service a debt, I don't know, I've learned what it means now, but at the time I'm like, oh, like our mortgage payment. Yeah, basically. It's like, oh, okay. Because you use these governmental terms of service a debt, where to me, that's my rent or mortgage payment, or that's my loan payment for my car. I don't say, I don't service my car loan. I just pay my car payment. You know what I mean? And so it's some of those little things that make it hard for the layperson to discuss it because we don't understand some of the terms like TIFs and pilot programs and stuff like that. I've got a little bit of a loose idea of what those are, but until recently I didn't know what that was. And so to talk about what that means on the financing side and what that means for our tax base and what that does to X, Y, and Z, first we got to tackle some of these, put it in English, and then we can talk about it. But we don't even have the Latin version on the table yet to get translated to then talk about. And that's and again, in the time frame we're talking about, it doesn't seem like a lot of time to get enough eyes on it that know what the words are to get it to English, to get it to the public, to then have the public bring it back with, hold on a second, what about this thing?
Yeah.
So I'm fully on board, and the timeline is concerning to me because it feels like it's rushed. Maybe not be the right word, but it's. I don't think it's going to get. I don't see how it's going to get enough public input where it's not going to feel like it was rammed down those throats that don't necessarily agree.
Yeah, and it's interesting to go back to the report that Nashville did when they busted their budget by over 50%. Right, the original estimate 60 million ended up being 91. When they did their report, the number one thing they said is the reason why we busted the budget is we rushed it. And so Nashville said, here's the advice for anyone doing this in the future. And if you look at Nashville, they actually took more time when they did their soccer stadium. They're like, don't rush this process. And Knoxville's like, hey, hold my beer.
Right.
We're going to outdo Nashville on how fast we're rushing this.
Right. And again, to me, if Boyd's serious about it, he can go ahead and start tearing stuff down. That'll cut some. We can maybe start in winter of 21 if he already does some of the pre-work before we get there. Because either way, he's tearing it all down. Is the way I hear it. So.
That's clear. He already started. He removed the water tower.
That was my favorite. That was the only piece that I really liked down there. That's the only one I'm actually going to miss.
His plan is to keep that. He wants to incorporate it in the stadium.
That's kind of cool.
I got to admit, that's cool. Look, I like baseball. I'm a born and raised Cubs fan, and I would love. The thing is, when you look at all the charity work Randy Boyd does, and all the great things he does for the community, if he would have just came out here and just been like, look, I'm going to lose money on it. It doesn't make financial sense for me to do this, but I'm going to build the stadium. 100% me, right? Could you imagine the praise he would receive from people around Knox County and Knoxville? Like, certainly there would be some people that say, like, look, I have serious concerns about affordable housing and traffic. Like, those concerns would still exist, but the goodwill that he would receive from the entire community, and actually what's happening now is he is making himself a target for populist, I don't want to say anger, but, something to that effect where, populist frustration where it's like, all right, here we have another instance in America where a billionaire gets to play by their rules and the rest of us are stuck with the bill and told that we can't play by those rules.
Right. He gets he has recharactered himself as the guy from Monopoly, the Monopoly man.
Yeah,
put him in the top hat, and he's
bringing his image. When he ran for governor, he only got 38% of Knox County Republican voters to vote for him. He should have absolutely crushed it in Knox County and in East Tennessee. And I would imagine if he's going to run for governor again and this stadium goes through, I would be shocked if he even gets 25% of Republicans to vote for him in Knox County and even less in East Tennessee.
Right.
He's seriously damaging his reputation with this. And I think when you look at how much money he's worth, it's not worth it, but even if he gets his stadium, there is going to be a cost to him.
Right.
Regardless.
Right.
That
is a good point, and it's going to be a fun, for me at least, just for content's sake. It's going to be a fun year. Not talking about Board of Health finally getting something else to suck up some oxygen. I don't know if you saw this one. The definitely was the Richie Bueller episode. That was the Monday of the vote, the second Board of Health vote or whatever. I pulled the agenda. I don't know if you've looked down that. If you keep up with the agendas as they come through. But one of the I'm very concerned about this Knox County Sheriff's Office drone purchase, and I'm really not. I'm more concerned that nobody seems to know what it's for, but the commission voted to approve it anyway. And so, like, this is as much fun as this stadium is, as much fun as the Board of Health has been, and content creation's sake, it's been nice, but it is completely overwhelmed all the other things going on, and nobody. That I don't know. Maybe I should be more excited about it because it gives me more, gives me a bigger niche. Because I'm trying to find the other things that aren't getting talked about. Because I can't. The more I look at it, the more I'm trying to learn about it. This drone thing, nobody said a word about it. They just $17,000 buy a drone from the Army or whoever, and the sheriff's office has it now, and they're allowed to use it. Not sure what for, and that got completely overlooked by the baseball and Board of Health conversation.
Well, thank you for bringing that to my attention, and what you're saying is absolutely right. How those other issues get overlooked, but I also think it's time to recognize that these virtual meetings are negatively impacting our democracy.
I agree.
Public discussion. It has to stop now. Look, we've been dealing with this with the coronavirus for a year now. They put up the plastic barriers in the meeting room. We can take precautions. People can sit apart if they choose to, but it's not worth the cost to our democracy and public policy. It's really not.
I agree.
Sorry. I think people would criticize me about that, but at the end of the day, the health of our democracy is so vital, and I just feel like these virtual meetings are insulating elected officials from the public.
I agree with that for sure. I think, and realistically, like, I don't know, we had the Paul's Oasis got busted, and it's like, are we going to see a change in infection rates because this bar got shut down? No, I don't think that's going to change anything. So what was the point of putting the thing in the first place? Sorry, I didn't want to go down about it. I'm not going down a Board of Health rant. I'm shutting up. But yeah, I agree. I think we've got it. I think there's a convenience to it that once it got permissed, everybody was like, okay, this is kind of cool. I can do this from the house. And it's like, yeah, you can, but that's not how it should be done. We need to be in person. I want to have people back in studio with me instead of doing these virtually. I prefer have people over, even though I've been doing it the whole time, those that wanted to. But it has been a nice feature to have available for in times of need. But I agree with you. I think we're past that time of need. I think there's a requirement that they need to get back out there and face to face with some distance with the public, like they're supposed to be. I don't know, man. I'm going to keep up with this. I'm going to keep on it. It's going to be a continuous conversation. I'm trying to get some of the, I guess, the team that's putting the proposal together to come go through and talk to me about some of the other finer points that I don't understand, which are plenty. And I'm going to keep digging. If you want to give yourself a shameless plug, and I'm going to get us out of here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much again for having me on. If people want to oppose the stadium, they can go to KNATS, the Knoxville Against Taxpayers Stadium on Facebook. We also have a petition. The one thing I have to say, I really enjoy the media coverage recently and them doing this meeting is the number of people who have signed the petition to oppose it has shot up. I think that's great. People do not feel discouraged. Do not feel like this is a done deal. Take action and fight it. Because if you don't, then it will be a done deal. This is our government. These are our taxpayer dollars. We're the people, and we're the ones that should have the say.
Right on. Well, I'll put the link to your guys' Facebook page in the show notes, and we're out of here.
All right. Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Thanks, boss. Eric Wire, everybody. We watched that 2.5 hour meeting of nothingness last night, and we wanted to talk about it. Like I said, I'm working on the other side of the story, trying to get somebody to sell it to me. Because again, like I said, my goal in this is I have my own opinions, and that's great, but that's not the point. My goal is to have the information out so that we can actually discuss what's actually happening in front of us instead of getting real dug into some ideological issues about it, instead of saying, here's the reasons, here's the problems, here's the good things, here's the bad things, and actually talking about those instead of getting into vagary and not actually really discussing what is in front of us and what is happening. We're almost in agreement at gmail.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Hit us up and let us know what you think about the baseball stadium project, and we're going to keep working from there, and we appreciate y'all. Have a great afternoon.